What if I told you the rule you followed for years? Wait until 50 to get screened for colorectal cancer. May now be outdated. For decades, that age was treated as the universal starting point. But here is the part most people do not know. Colorectal cancer is rising in adults under 50, and that change forced major health organizations to lower the recommended screening age. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why and what you should do differently. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I am Claire, and with me, as always, is Robert.
And I am Robert Clare. This one already sounds like it is going to change something I do every day. I will admit, I always thought colon cancer was something that mostly showed up in people my age or older. Are you telling me that is not quite right?
That is exactly what the evidence now tells us, Robert. Before I get into the details, let me set the stage. The colon, also called the large intestine, is the final part of your digestive tract. It absorbs water and turns liquid waste into solid stool. Colorectal cancer starts when cells in the colon or rectum grow out of control. The real danger is that in its early stages, this cancer often causes no symptoms at all. No bleeding, no pain, no change in bowel habits. Nothing that would make you think something is wrong.
So it silently grows while you feel completely fine. That is a genuinely unsettling thought.
It can be, but that is also precisely why screening is so powerful. It is not designed to catch cancer only after symptoms appear. For colorectal cancer, screening has a unique superpower. It can actually prevent cancer from developing in the first place. And here is the mechanism. Most colorectal cancers begin as small growths called polyps on the inner lining of the colon. Think of a polyp like a tiny weed sprouting in a garden. At first, it is harmless, but over years, some polyps can slowly change into cancer. A colonoscopy not only finds those polyps, the doctor can remove them during the same procedure before they ever become malignant.
Wait, hold on. So the test does not just find cancer early, it can stop it before it starts? I had no idea that was the mechanism that changes the whole way I think about it.
That is exactly right, Robert. And that is why the screening age matters so much. If you start late, those polyps have more time to progress. If you start at the recommended age, you give yourself a real head start. But many people still believe the old number, 50, is the magic starting point. Let me walk you through what changed.
Please, because I still remember the posters in the doctor's office saying screening starts at 50. They made it sound like a fixed rule.
It was fixed for a long time, and for good reason. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the highest risk really was concentrated in older adults. But over the past 2 decades, researchers noticed something troubling. The incidence of colorectal cancer in people under 50 started climbing steadily. In fact, according to the American Cancer Society, incidence rates in adults under 55 have been increasing by 1 to 2% per year since the mid-1990s. That may sound small, but compounded over decades, it adds up to a major shift.
1 to 2% per year? If you are 45 now, that adds up over 10 or 15 years. So it is not just a blip.
No, it is a sustained trend. And here is the finding that surprised me most when I first saw it. In 2021, the United States Preventive Services Task Force, an independent panel of experts who review all the evidence, updated its official guideline. They now recommend that adults at average risk begin colorectal cancer screening at age 45 instead of 50.
45, not 50? That is 5 years earlier than I expected. What evidence pushed them to make that change?
Several large studies. One key paper published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute analyzed data from more than 100,000 people and found that early onset colorectal cancer was rising across all racial and ethnic groups, and that the increase was not simply due to more screening. Another study in gastroenterology projected that people born around 1990 have double the risk of colon cancer and quadruple the risk of rectal cancer, compared with people born around 1950 at the same age. Those numbers are significant.
Quadruple? That is a massive difference. Why is that happening? Is it because of diet or lifestyle changes?
Researchers are still trying to pin down the exact reasons, but they believe several factors are involved. Diets higher in processed and red meat, lower fiber intake, rising obesity rates, less physical activity, alcohol consumption, and changes in the gut microbiome all likely play a role. The important point is not to blame any one food or habit. It is that the risk profile is shifting younger, so the screening age had to shift with it.
So instead of waiting until 50, a person should start talking to their doctor at 45. But is colonoscopy the only option? Because I know a lot of people are afraid of the prep and the procedure.
That is a great question, and you are right. The prep can be unpleasant, but the procedure itself is usually done under sedation, and most people do not remember it. The good news is colonoscopy is not the only screening option. There are stool-based tests like the fecal immunochemical test or FIT, which you can do at home. There is also a stool DNA test that checks for blood and abnormal DNA, and there are imaging tests like CT colonography. But here is the key. Colonoscopy is the only test that both detects and removes polyps in the same procedure. The stool tests are excellent at detecting cancer, but if they come back positive, you still need a colonoscopy to confirm and remove anything suspicious.
So colonoscopy is the gold standard because it is preventive, not just detective.
That is a lovely way to put it. And yes, that is the core of why it is so valuable. Now, I want to give everyone a clear practical takeaway. If you are 45 or older and at average risk, meaning no personal history of colorectal cancer, no inflammatory bowel disease, no family history of colorectal cancer, or certain genetic syndromes, the evidence says you should start screening. If you have a first-degree relative who had colorectal cancer or advanced polyps, you may need to start even earlier, often 10 years before the age your relative was diagnosed, or at age 40, whichever comes first. But that is absolutely a conversation to have with your doctor, because individual risk varies.
That is a very specific rule of thumb. So if my brother was diagnosed at 50, do I start at 40? Is that right?
Correct. That is exactly what the guidelines suggest. But again, your doctor will help you tailor it to your own situation. And this is where I want to be very clear. This episode is health education, not medical advice. If you have symptoms like blood in your stool, unexplained weight loss, or a persistent change in bowel habits, do not wait for a screening age. See your doctor promptly.
That is important to say. A lot of people might wave off those symptoms because they are not 50 yet.
Absolutely. Now, let me step back and explain what the research actually shows about early detection. A colonoscopy is essentially a long, flexible tube with a tiny camera and light at the end. The doctor guides it through the rectum and colon while you are sedated. The camera sends images to a screen, and if the doctor sees polyps, they can pass small tools through the tube to remove them. Most polyps are benign, but some, called adenomatous polyps, have the potential to become cancerous over many years. That is why the procedure is so effective. Removing a polyp before it turns malignant can reduce colorectal cancer mortality by a substantial margin. Studies consistently show that regular screening reduces the risk of dying from colorectal cancer by about 30 to 50%. Depending on the study and the population.
30 to 50%? That is enormous. Most prevention numbers are single digits.
And it makes sense when you understand the biology. Colorectal cancer usually takes 10 to 15 years to develop from a polyp. That creates a long window of opportunity. Think of it like a slow moving train that you can stop at the station instead of waiting until it is barreling through the neighborhood. Screening is that early stop.
I love that analogy. It makes the timeline feel less abstract. But I have to ask, why is early onset colorectal cancer increasing? Is it because younger people are getting screened more, or are they actually getting more cancer?
That is an excellent question, Robert. And the answer is both, but the increase is real. Initially, some thought the rise was simply due to more awareness and more testing, but researchers have looked at large population databases and found that the incidence is genuinely climbing, not just being detected more often. For example, a study published in the journal Gastroenterology looked at data from over 100,000 people and found that the proportion of colorectal cancer diagnosed before age 50 increased significantly, even after accounting for screening uptake. Another analysis from the American Cancer Society projected that by 2030, colorectal cancer could become the leading cause of cancer death among adults aged 20 to 49 in the United States.
The leading cause? That is startling, but it also feels like something we can act on if we know about it.
Exactly. And this is where I want to shift from fear to empowerment. The fact that the risk is rising is not a reason to panic, it is a reason to update your prevention plan. And knowledge is the first half of that plan. The second half is action.
Okay, so what does the action look like for someone listening right now? Let us say I am 45, average risk, no symptoms. What do I actually do next?
The first step is straightforward. When you have your next checkup, bring up colorectal cancer screening. You can say, I am 45 now, and I understand the guidelines recommend starting screening which test is right for me. Your doctor will ask about your personal and family history and help you choose between a colonoscopy, a stool-based test, or another method. If you are due for a screening and have not done it, that conversation is the single most important health action you can take this year for colorectal cancer prevention.
That is refreshingly simple. It is not a complicated protocol, it is a conversation with your doctor.
Right. And if you are younger than 45 but have risk factors, do not assume you are automatically fine. A family history, a personal history of inflammatory bowel disease, certain genetic syndromes, or even concerning symptoms should prompt an earlier conversation, regardless of your age.
What about lifestyle? I know we have talked about diet and exercise in other episodes. Is there anything that actually lowers the risk of polyps or colorectal cancer?
Yes, and the evidence here is consistent with the broader longevity research. Diets rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, and other fiber sources are associated with lower colorectal cancer risk. The fiber is particularly important because it feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce short chain fatty acids like bidrate, which appear to have protective effects in the colon. On the flip side, processed meats, things like bacon, sausages, hot dogs, and deli slices, have been classified as carcinogenic to humans by the World Health Organization. That does not mean you can never eat them, but the evidence suggests limiting them makes sense.
So, no need to be perfect, but shift the balance toward more fiber and fewer processed meats.
Exactly. Regular physical activity also lowers risk, likely by improving insulin sensitivity and reducing inflammation. Maintaining a healthy weight, limiting alcohol, and avoiding tobacco all matter too. But I want to emphasize one thing. Lifestyle changes are powerful, but they do not replace screening. Even the healthiest eater can develop colorectal cancer. Screening is not a punishment for poor habits, it is a safeguard for everyone.
That is a crucial distinction. Sometimes people think if they eat well and exercise, they do not need screening, but the polyps do not care how many salads you eat.
That is one way to put it. But yes, Robert, the two work together. Lifestyle reduces your overall risk, and screening catches what lifestyle cannot prevent.
Now, I remember you mentioned something about a blue zone or research case study in the chapter list. Is there a link between those long lived populations and lower colorectal cancer rates?
That is a great observation. Blue zones are regions where people live exceptionally long, like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, and Loma Linda in California. Their traditional diets are very high in fiber, legumes, and vegetables, and very low in processed meat and added sugar. They also tend to be physically active throughout the day and have strong social connections. Research shows these populations have lower rates of colorectal cancer and other chronic diseases, but importantly, they also benefit from access to screening in some of those areas, which reinforces that prevention is both lifestyle and early detection.
So it is not genetics or magic, it is the combination of diet, movement, and getting checked.
Exactly, and that is a perfect transition to today's one memorable takeaway. Robert, what would you say you have learned that you will act on?
For me, the biggest shift is the age. I always thought 50 was the start line. Now I know that for average risk adults, 45 is the new recommendation, and if there is a family history, it might be even earlier. I am going to ask my doctor at my next appointment, even though I am in my mid 60s and already past the starting line. But I also want to tell my kids and younger friends to start that conversation at 45, not wait.
That is a wonderful personal application, Robert. And for all our listeners, here is today's rule: do not wait for symptoms or for an outdated number. If you are 45 or older, ask your doctor about colorectal cancer screening this year. Early detection is not just about catching cancer. In this case, it can prevent it entirely.
And that is a prevention message worth sharing.
If today's episode gave you a clearer picture of why the screening age changed, please subscribe to Longevity Lab for daily evidence based health insights. And if you know someone who still believes 50 is the magic number, send this episode their way. It might just change their timeline.
Thanks for listening, and remember, knowledge is only powerful when you act on it. See you next time.